welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Lisa from Syosset Public Library, and we are going to now turn the page.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me on. My name is David Hopen. I am the author of The Orchard, which is my debut novel, which has been out now for almost 2 months. It's almost its 2-month birthday, and excited to be here.
And it actually was one of my favorite books of 2020.
Thank you.
We did an end of year thing here at the library, and I named it one of my favorites. And then we did something on Twitter where we named our favorites. So I said it was, definitely one of my favorites. So first question I have for you is, was there anything in the book based on your real life? And if so, what was it?
This, of course, is everyone's favorite question. No, this is an entirely fictional work. It's not autobiographical. What I did draw from was, in some ways, what a modern Orthodox community looks like. I grew up in modern Orthodox communities. I went to those kinds of day schools. And even at the time when I started writing this book, I was a senior in high school, about 17, 18 years old. And I was fascinated by the way in which these kinds of communities are enormously unique and fascinating within the general landscape in American society. They don't get too much play in fiction, even within the Jewish American canon. And so I was interested in the way in which this subculture exists and oftentimes neglected in America. And so I was interested in drawing from that. I was interested in looking at what it looks like when you have a dual curriculum and you're studying ritual and prayer and Judaic classes in concert with secular studies and having very modern aspirations and ambitions and a lifestyle. And so in that way, the book does draw from real experiences, but some of the pyrotechnics of the book and such are not autobiographical.
I was going to say, some of that stuff was really wild. Did you ever meet anyone like Evan?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I have met people who are deep thinkers and people with larger than life personalities and larger than life and genuine interests in making sense of the world and finding intellectual coherence within the tradition in which they're steeped. But no, I haven't met someone as unhinged or as dangerous as Evan Stark.
Yeah, he was very, that's a good way of summing him up.
Yeah.
He's just, I wanted to say charismatic, but it was like scarily charismatic. Like I just almost like got scared every time he was going to do something. Like I didn't know where he was taking anybody. Like I just, there was so many, I don't want to give it away. That's why, but there's just so many things that I was just like, wow, where is he going now?
Right.
But in this whole thing, did you go to any yeshivas or schools like the two in the book, or did you just pull from different things?
I did attend yeshiva high school. I attended yeshiva from the time I was a small child. And so I did grow up learning, Talmud and Bible and doing it, as I said, in synchrony with a very normal and rigorous secular education. And so I knew what it was like to balance that. I knew what it was like to go from prayer to AP classes to Talmud to basketball practice. So that kind of lifestyle, I think, is fascinating. This is not, in the story I set out to write, was not really a leaving the fold story, which is a genre that I think we see a lot, even in works like Unorthodox on Netflix, which was a big hit in the past year. This is a different kind of story. And I was shocked at the time when I started writing this in high school that it wasn't something covered within the books I was reading, even in Jewish works. And even now, I think it's still uniquely, I won't say unnoticed, but neglected in some ways. And so more than anything, that's what I was interested in thinking about.
you just said you started writing in high school.
Yeah.
How many years did it take you to like from start to finish? Did you like put it down and then pick it back up? And
Yeah, so this is, as I like to joke, this is the coming of age book that came of age with me. I started outlining the prehistoric notes and characters and some scenes early on, in 18 years old, and then I went off to college. And I would say the first half of my collegiate career, this was something that was more of a passion project. I was writing it in the few spare moments in between classes and extracurricular life, and so I wrote it linearly and I wrote it continually, but sometimes I would wait for the muse to descend upon me. Sometimes I would wait for when I just had free time. And so I didn't have any kind of, I was disciplined about writing it, but I didn't have a scheduled routine. I would just kind of, it was its own work that came along when it had time. When I was a junior, I had the once in a lifetime wonderful privilege of doing a one-on-one tutorial with Susan Choi, who was on faculty at my college. And I remember meekly showing her the first, 100, 150 pages I had written at that time. And she was, not only is she a brilliant writer, she is a very gracious mentor. And so she emboldened me and made me feel as if it's something I could take seriously and pursue at the next level. And so at that point, there was a shift in mentality a bit. I tried to set out some goals in terms of pages I wanted to hit. And I wanted to have a draft in line by the time I graduated college, which thankfully that came to fruition. I went off to do a master's in England after college, and I was doing my dissertation, which had nothing to do with my book, but in my spare moments I was revising. And so I would say this took about 6 years. And it's interesting because I imagine I'll never have this kind of experience writing a book again, where you're writing it in school, largely on the side. And over the course of, very informative and important years of your life. So this is kind of my baby. It's gratifying and interesting to see it out in the world and have its own life.
so it ended up being 459 pages, but who's counting? Which I guess is long for some people, because a lot of people here in the library, I give them a book and they're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to read all these pages. I have no problem with that, obviously, but did anyone ever tell you scale it back, or this is, or did you get any advice about the length for a debut novel?
It was never too much of an issue. It was something we thought about a bit towards the end in the revision process, just wanting to maybe tighten things a little bit. That we do have the awareness that for a lot of readers, 460 pages is an imposing number. And so here and there, when some things maybe were extraneous and could be simplified a bit, we actualized that. But other than that, no, it was never really a problem. The books that I enjoyed reading most growing up were these long galloping reads. And so it's something that I naturally fell into as a reader, and I guess as a writer too. This felt like the appropriate length for the book. There's a lot in there, but there are shifts within the book. In some sense, it's almost like two books within one. And so for me, it felt like the natural, proper length of the book. Hopefully it worked out that way.
Yeah, I never felt like there was anything that, needed to be chopped out or anything.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if anybody ever said like,
Sure.
Did anyone ever tell you to make it more like, I don't know, less about religion or anything like that? Did they ever say maybe, I don't know, like put more, like, I don't know, just, I have no problem with it either, but I'm just saying like to make it more, so people could identify with it, make it less Jewish.
Right. I mean, what you're saying is a natural impulse. I've seen people ask that question because in some sense, this is a book of ideas. It deals not only with nuanced looks at a particular religious subculture, but also it poses some big questions in philosophy and faith, in study in general. But it's also a thriller. It's fast paced. And so thankfully that also was never an issue. I think that the kinds of questions I was trying to get at, and even the questions that are integral to the Talmudic myth, which inspires this book, are universal and in terms of what people identify with and in terms of the larger questions they bring about. And I think in some ways that, this is a book that can appeal to, to many different types of readers. I've seen it thankfully already since the book has been out. Different, radically different kinds of audiences have embraced the book, which has been humbling and very cool to see, especially as a debut author. And I think, interestingly enough, I was curious to see what it would look like to release a book, especially a debut book in a global pandemic. And one effect of it, I think, is that life has changed in serious ways for people, and people are keen to grapple with and think about how to adapt and how to inject new purpose and new meaning. And even in daily life, our daily ritual is very much disrupted and chaotic and grim in some ways. And so I think people are eager to think about these kind of bigger questions. What does it mean to be a good and or moral person? What's the relationship between the two? What does it mean to be worthy not only in our religious life, but in our political or in our civic identities? What does it mean to fall in love and feel like you belong? And so these kinds of questions, I think, are universal in scope. And the last thing I'll say on that is that this time period that's covered in the book is an important time period for anybody who's ever gone to high school and who's ever come of age. And so whether you did it in this kind of community or in a community that bears no resemblance to this one, these are the kind of common, universal, break your heart and life enriching themes that I think people have gone through. So in my mind, that was what I was aiming to do. I'm grateful that largely has been the reception. So, yeah.
It's really interesting to me watching Ari, start, at first he didn't want to drink, to watch him just he was just, the way he changed his life in that 1 year, go from he was almost like a totally different person from the beginning to the end of what he believed in, the whole sex thing, the whole everything, and I think that honestly that could be in general, it could spread from freshman year to senior year. There's always, you just change, and he just happened to do it in a shorter amount of time than most kids do at that. And I was just watching him, the whole thing unravel. It was I felt like I identified with him, even though he was a boy. You feel like you can understand how you want to fit in, and you like this group and where he came from, how he felt about his friends back home, and how different it was with his friends, in this new area. And he almost reinvented himself, and that is something that everyone could identify with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think especially being on the precipice of adulthood at that age and even into your 20s, things have a funny way of feeling grander than they do in other parts of life, and they feel majestic, and if the stakes are higher. And I think this is the time when you fall in love with ideas that will go on to haunt you for decades to come. And certain thinkers, especially someone like Ari, who's hungry for knowledge and hungry for experience, this is that pivotal time in life when you are solidifying yourself as a human being. And that's something that I think is common to anybody.
Yeah. And it just felt like we were watching him almost kind of come out of a cocoon.
Yeah.
but in the relationship to his father, though, I think that was the one thing that just troubled me. I just felt so bad about how he was getting along with both of his parents. His mother seemed to want to let him experience life more than his father wanted him to, stick with what he knew and what they were comfortable with. It was just, I don't know, it was just very amazing to me just to watch the whole thing change from beginning to the end.
Thank you.
So did your family, speaking of family, did your family encourage you to write this book, or are they focus on school?
They've been supremely encouraging. There was never a conflict with school. I've been, juggling all the things at once, but my entire family, my parents in particular, have been championing this project and all the different endeavors I've been involved with from the very beginning. They were my original editors. They've seen every draft of this book. They can probably recite it by heart the same way I can at this point. And I'm very grateful to have had parents who are not just encouraging, but who are they were genuinely happy for me, and they guided me, and they were, audiences to talk out different big themes. And even on the granular level of writing this book. And those are the kind of parents they are just in general in my life. And so I'm very, very appreciative to have had that. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for anyone who would like to write a book?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that I wrote this book under a very particular set of circumstances, and what I can extract from this experience is that it is very helpful, even if you're busy with work or school or other parts of life. Life is demanding, and writing is hard, writing is labor. To recognize that it's not going to come immediately, and to set out a routine, stick to it. I have found that when I was first writing this for the first several years, there was this instinct to try to perfect every word I had on the page, make it as opulent as it can. And then when I move on to the next chapter, the next day I'd start again and revise again. And that is one way to write, and it works for people. But I think eventually, if you're trying to get a story out, it's helpful to just get things down on the page and move on, and then you can go back and reshape. So I would say, first have a good sense of how long this project might take. It's an interesting industry. Writing takes a long time, and so be willing to make the time, even if you have to put together a half hour a day. And the second thing I would say is to keep moving, keep it going.
And are you writing anything currently?
Yeah, I'm at work on the second book. It turns out that writing a new book while doing a book launch, while being in your first semester of law school and doing finals is a lot. So I had to put it on the back burner for a few weeks, but I'm very excited about the new project. And yeah, I'm excited for that.
Okay, now I have some fun questions.
Sure.
First of all,
those were fun too.
Well, what made you choose a cupcake as I'm just curious what it was that made you go.
I think of all the interviews I've done, this is the first time that's been posed. It's a fun question. I don't have a profound answer. I think that there's some natural irony to it. There's something unassuming about a cupcake. There's something also about just desserts. And obviously Noah's mother is a local celebrity in terms of being like a Martha Stewart-esque chef. And so it kind of it fit the part. And I think in some ways it's hard to understate that something as normal as a cupcake could actually be sinister and suddenly when you abruptly think about things in a new light. And so those are the reasons I think I was thinking of, but there was no metaphysical, I guess, reason for the cupcake.
It was funny as I was reading, I'm like, oh no, once they realized it and I realized it, I'm like, oh no. This is really funny. All right. And my last question is, so according to the back of the book, it says that you grew up in Hollywood, Florida. I happen to go there every year because my boyfriend's father has a condo there. Okay. So I'm very well aware of the area, everything. And I was wondering if you know any good restaurants or anything you could recommend.
I can recommend a lot of kosher restaurants if you're looking for those. There's some good pizza places. There's Sarah's Pizza, which is the staple of this. I think they'd get a laugh knowing that they're being mentioned on a podcast. If you go to like Bell Harbor area, there are a lot of good kosher restaurants worth checking out.
Okay. I just thought it was funny. I was like, I go to Hollywood all the time.
That is funny.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. And I really enjoyed interviewing, and I really enjoyed this book, and I'm recommending it to everybody who's looking for a good read.
I'm very grateful for that. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.